Hi, David. Thanks for coming on the Teacher's Point of View podcast. Thanks for having. I mean, it's been brilliant to have you. I mean, we had a little bit of a conversation about sort of where you're at. Just could you just kind of run through where you're at and your journey into teaching and sort of what got you to headship and what your journey's been like, please?
Okay, I'll do my best. Yeah, thanks for that, TJ. Well, just it's very difficult to sort of summarise the whole thing, and I'm sure we'll kind of dip into so many different sort of aspects of the journey, really. But I mean, I was somebody who didn't sit down as a kid and make a decision and a career plan that I was going to go into headship or to become a teacher. I was like most kids, and like my son is now. I didn't really have any kind of a game plan. And in some ways, that really served me well because I went to study fine art. I was a creative soul. I like to think that I still apply those skills in school settings. But that meant that I kind of fell into working with children, and I was working in the first opportunity I got post-grad was to go and work in a school, a special needs school for a child that had died in a house fire, and I was asked to do a wall mural with all of his peers, and we did this fantastic wall mural that was 50 foot long. It was incredible, and it was a large special needs school in Bradford. It was an incredible place to be, and at the end of it, really, the deputy head sort of spotted the fact that I had a good rapport with the children. And really what that meant was, once I sort of had that recognition and started to sort of develop that relationship with the children, I started to really enjoy the work that I was doing. And really that meant that I had I got the job, really. I fell into teaching because I was good with children. Which is a good way to start. It served me really well, rather than going in through a career and a vocational route. So rather than me going through university and progressing that way and then, doing a PGCE, in actual fact, the relationship with the children came first. And that really stood me in good stead. And for every post and every position I've had, at the core, at the heart of it, has always been the relationship with the children. And I think if you're centered in that way, you can learn the rest as you move through. So you can learn about leadership, you can learn about education, you can learn about learning. But you have to have that relationship with the children first and foremost. So that's how I ended up sort of starting in teaching. And I moved to London and I worked in Hackney. I've always worked in schools where there's been a high degree of challenge. I've always found that that's my place. That's been a preference. And I've come away from those places every day, having learned, things that have helped me to be better the next day. So it's in that sense, one thing has led to another.
Fantastic. And like your time when you went into sort of teaching and you went into senior leadership, I mean, what was it that for you that kind of made you want to go into headship?
I think that when you're presented with an opportunity, I mean, I was always willing to do things that were for free, So if I was a teaching assistant, which I was for a long time, I would run the football team, or I would coordinate the art, or I would do something, whatever opportunity. I would seek to do more and to have more influence, and that was really satisfying for me. And the minute that somebody says, "Would you like to be a senior leader?" Then basically it's the opportunity, the invitation is there. Somebody's put some faith in you and spotted that you've got something to give, and you work then on intuition, really. I suppose you then start to learn about leadership when you have that opportunity, and you start to realize kind of how you can influence and shape the school that you're working in and the setting that you're in. And that's a really sort of creative process. That's something that I really enjoy. And once you start falling into that cycle and you read and you learn and you strengthen and you hone your skill set and you become good at it, then ultimately, the offset of that is that, you see the impact on the children. You see these things, you see children leave the school at the end of the day happy and successful.
Yeah, fantastic. I think with when you're kind of going in from like a deputy head teacher and you're kind of going into a headship role, I think that's naturally going to have many challenges, isn't it? I mean, you're literally going in as a brand new head teacher. You've never run a school completely before. Like what is it? I mean, was it a brand new school that you went into a headship role, or was it sort of did you progress in the same school?
No, I went. I mean, originally I went to work in a school in special measures that was pretty close to closing down. So it had 94% attendance. You know, the windows were getting smashed every day. It was in a really tough corner of town, high levels of deprivation. You came home in the dark. You went home in the dark. You know, you know, when you got the opportunity to do things and to influence change in those kind of parts of town and those kind of circumstance, you lap it up. You know, and so ultimately, one thing, like I say, what leads to another. And when you get the chance to be a head teacher, so I'd been an acting head for 2 years in a school in that circumstance, and we'd had some rapid improvement, and we were rolling. That school then closed, and two schools were put together. So to answer your question, we had an infant and nursery school and a junior school with quite different fortunes historically. They were put together to make one big school in the same area. And I was appointed as head teacher and had basically about 6 weeks to kind of put everything in place to open a brand new school. So lots of smoke and mirrors, and you know, I kind of, you know, that was my first sort of introduction really to sort of serious headship in as much as it required some real sort of consideration and
Yeah.
a lot of you know, a lot of quick thinking really.
Oh, I've spoken to Dee Conlon, who actually founded a school a couple of years ago in Harlow, and she talks about what you actually have to do. I mean, people, it's not as simple as just opening a school, is it? You have to do marketing, you have to attract the right students, you have to attract the parents, you have to make sure you get the staff because nobody wants to work in a failing school. Nobody wants to send a child to a failing school, you know, and I mean, how did you find the challenges of getting the community together to want to send their children to their school, get the children to believing in the ethos, and then getting the staff to like follow through in the vision you had? What was the most difficult part of that?
Well, I mean, it's incredibly stressful, but it's to some extent, but it's an absolute privilege. You know, I mean, the thing about it is that again, it goes back to opportunity, and every little aspect of it is an opportunity to build your team, to, you know, to be able to influence. I mean, ultimately, you have to take a step back and say what we're trying to create, you know, and the vision is always got to be heartfelt. So you've got to say that this school is going to be a school that's going to do A, B, and C. So, you know, the prospect of being able to create a school where 60 children every year go into that community, into a deprived area and make a difference over 10 years, you know, 600 pupils and so on. You know, the game plan is you know, it's simple. You've got to say, you know, this is it has to come from that place. You have to start the origins of the school from that circumstance, and you have to tap into that human sort of connection, because that is the reason why people will come to school. It's not the pay packet. So when you're building your team and you've got that vision in front of you, I mean, you've got all, you know, we had 6 weeks, and I remember waking up in the middle of the night not knowing that we had, you know, do we have a phone number? You know, I remember a fella ringing me from home and saying, I'm in your school and I'm going to paint reception. I've been asked to do it. What colour does it need to be? And I was sort of saying, oh, have you seen Coventry City's kit? It's that kind of blue. So I was sort of making these references and moving through decisions, ties, yes, publicity, and you're right, making sure that the parents sort of could see the vision and the aspiration of the school as well, so that they could see, right, hang on a minute, it's a big council estate. You know, it's very diverse. You've got 30 different languages or 30 nationalities, 9 faith groups. You know, who wants a school in the middle of that estate that's going to fail? It has to be a school that's going to be good. And so you have to be able to, yes, sell it, but in actual fact, it's not a marketing sort of proposal. It's more to do with standing there, talking to people and asking them what they want and being receptive to what they need. And when we did that, the minute that you get your success, I mean, we did everything. We got a big mascot called Tommy the Tiger. We put a flagpole at the front of the school. You know, we did all the external things that would say that this is going to be a beacon. This is going to be somewhere to come and do great things. And when we did that, you know, the first indicators, the first responses that you get, they're positive. You take them and you share them and you feed them back and you grow. And once you start to be able to do that, you know, that's your smoke and mirrors. Internally, you know, inside the school, then the leadership, you know, you then have to start taking care of the quality of your provision and making sure that your vision is living and breathing within the school.
Yeah.
And that's where your leadership really starts to sort of flourish, really, or has an opportunity to.
Yeah, and how difficult was it at that point in those 6 weeks to try to get the right amount of funding from like the local authority or the government just to try to support you in creating this brand new school?
Well, we you know, I'll be really honest. I mean, at the time, we had all the talks really to be able to merge the schools and to create the school, and then it's a local authority school, and then they withdrew and started working because it was a national project really to be able to build new schools at the time to accommodate school places, particularly in areas where you've got, you know, increasing sort of populations. So financially, you know, I'd always been used to solving problems without throwing money at them. And I think that in education, you become solution focused. And whilst you want to talk about money and politics, sometimes, you know, in actual fact, the solutions don't have to cost very much. I mean, to have good teaching, to have the right people, you know, we went from 360 on roll in the first year to 450 on roll in the second year. And that was nothing to do with finance. That wasn't to do with you know, that was entirely to do with how the parents felt about the school when they walked through the door, which doesn't have to cost money. It's about people at the end of the day. So yes, it can be difficult, but in actual fact, and no doubt, you know, the purse strings get tighter. But at the time, you know, we were, you know, it didn't inhibit the vision that we wanted to promote and that we wanted to create.
Fantastic. I mean, ultimately, that will come from leadership. And sometimes, like you said, you don't necessarily need money. It's about like the vision you have and how you enforce it, isn't it? Like, how difficult has it been? Are you still there, by the way?
I'm not. No, I finished in. I was due. I was due to finish. Yeah, I did. I was due to finish before. I gave my notice in just before Christmas because I had a business that I was going to launch, really, an educational business, an online learning platform, and that was something that I'd worked towards doing. I decided to stay and sort of see the school through the challenges, the COVID challenges, and to get to the summer and work, hopefully, so that there was some kind of an overlap. And to finish there, really. But it was within that community, it was 18 years in total. So I felt, and it was the right reason for leaving. I was taking everything that I'd learned and putting it into the next stage of my career, really.
Yeah, fantastic. And I mean, it sounds like you've done a really good job, to be fair. And congratulations on starting your own business. What? I mean, this online platform. Talk to us about this. What does it do?
Well, I was only ever going to leave. I absolutely loved my school, and I was so rooted to the job and the community. The people, you know, it was only ever going to take something special to move on. And I'd looked at other heads. It was a big school, and so there wasn't a logical progression, and I really didn't want to work at another school. So everything that I'd done, I never felt like I could supersede what we'd achieved at that school. We'd got it from, you know, in theory, from special measures to good, 2 consecutive good outcomes with all of the challenges that were there. So I knew that it had to be something really special to leave. And over the last couple of years of working there, we devised some methods of being able to self-evaluate. So essentially, you know, the most important thing for any head teacher is to be able to go home at the end of the day to know how healthy your school is, to know whether the quality is, and to be able to intervene where you need to do. And that's sometimes data oriented. Anyway, long story short, I trialed and created an online learning platform, which means that you can walk around your school with your iPad and a tablet, and you can self-evaluate and build up a profile and a picture of all the strengths in your school by looking at the lessons and the books and talking to the children. And then that presents on your head teacher dashboard with an overview and a health check, so you can make your own decisions and be well informed and include other people in that process as well. So it's an online learning platform, really, and we launched about 6 weeks ago.
Fantastic! Congratulations.
Yeah, well, I haven't quite worked out kind of where I am yet personally, because like I say, I miss the school incredibly. I'm still working as a learning consultant as well, so I'm working with 5 schools on behalf of the local authority to help them. So it's great. It's really, again, it's that situation where you have an opportunity to be able to help others, and hopefully with that support and with the learning platform, I'm making a contribution to education and providing solutions and support for head teachers, because it's very hard for head teachers to be able to find time quite often to think clearly and to have solutions, particularly at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Talking about at the moment, so like just being in the teaching profession, how difficult has it actually been over the last 8 months?
I think it's really hard to quantify. It is very difficult. I mean, I know people who know schools really, really well, and I work with a lot of school leaders. I would say that the people who are sitting in those seats now, in the schools and the teachers within the schools, I would say overwhelmed is the right term. And it doesn't matter how experienced you are. It doesn't matter what you already know. The solutions that you're having to provide on a daily basis, and we're talking about Sunday morning at 9 o'clock, constant troubleshooting, just to be able to sustain opening and to be able to provide a service. And then heads have to worry about the quality of what's being provided, because the accountability doesn't stop. So you've got Ofsted still, making plans to regulate and inspect schools. If you take all that and put it on the shoulders of a head teacher, how do you expect them to sleep at night? How do you expect them to find respite and get clarity? They can't go on holiday at the minute, and more often than not, when they get a week off, that's a week spent troubleshooting, providing solutions. How are we going to assess the children? You've got all these sort of clumsy terms as well, that are being bandied around about lost learning and catching up, and those kind of terms are a conversation in themselves, because I struggle with those. I find those really, they can fuel an adverse response in the general public if we're not careful, because it's steered by anxiety and worry.
We're already seeing that though, aren't we? We're really seeing that the general public are kind of having this idea that the teachers have been on holiday for the last 8 months, or they're not providing these kids with an education. I think it's very important that we make it clear, and again, this is what this podcast is for, but to make it very clear that teachers have not been on holiday for the last 8 months. They've probably had a more difficult time than probably most other professions, just behind doctors, I'd imagine, right? And we talk about these people that are not just providing an education, trying to adapt to provide an education online if need be, like being sick and trying to provide an education, like so the gap doesn't get sort of bigger between the advantage and the disadvantage. And then on top of that, like they're providing a safe haven for these children. Like it's not just about being a teacher. You're a policeman. You're a babysitter. You're a counsellor. You're all of these things, aren't you? I mean, like, how frustrating is it to be in the profession and to kind of hear the media portray you in a certain way?
Well, I mean, historically, I think the media have been a little bit like that. I think it's a cheap headline whether or not they've talked about strikes before, and whatever becomes newsworthy. The media. I mean, the media before pre-COVID we're all often very critical of doctors and nurses, often very critical of the service that was provided. The minute that those people were needed, then the whole pitch shifted really to try and celebrate and and give the right, and to manipulate the news and to create the picture that they want to create. It's the same with teaching. It's very easy to be critical of a teacher because every journalist and every person has been to school. They may not have had a very good experience. They may have had a good experience, but what they say about what teachers do, is a very narrow and limited perception. Teaching, when you go into teaching and you stand in a classroom, it is like having 30 phones ringing all at the same time. And at the minute, the through COVID and through the way schools are having to be managed, it's a constant cleaning process going on in the school to make sure that it's safe. Teachers are aware of that, and they're having to, I did a staff meeting over the summer, really great experienced teachers, and we had a staff meeting to get everybody together to talk about the start of the year, and to talk about the finish to the year, to get people back into school, to get the children back in. I had 25 teachers all stood in plastic hoops in a hall, in a freezing cold hall, and you have never seen a more anxious group of people. And these are people that I've known for years and years, trusted, good teachers. And they've put themselves straight in front of the class when it defies the science. And that's not because they've been told to, it's because they want to. They want to see children succeed. They're not able to switch off and to regulate that compassion and that desire to help children. They see it as being, they want to keep, and even recently when the unions are being involved and there's been the narrative on the television, and like you say, on the media, the way things have been portrayed, they want to be in schools. They're dedicated to be able to offer that to the children because they put the children first, and that's what the role is about. Somebody said to me the other week that if teachers had a uniform, would they be perceived differently? If you think about how we look at the NHS staff, for example, in a supermarket or in the community, and if we think about, fire service or whoever, the regard for teachers really needs to be addressed by the government and the media. And I think it needs, I think that in itself was there pre-COVID. COVID has created an opportunity for that misconception to be, to be revisited and unfortunately kind of peddled by the media, which is really unhelpful.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? Because as a teacher, as a senior leader, you want your staff on board and you want them to continue to do the great work for these children. But some of these teachers are sort of in the vulnerable category, or they're slightly older, and they've got a responsibility to help these kids, and they have to go to work, don't they? They have to help these kids, and they're worried for their lives. You talk about the being in that hall and them being very anxious. How difficult was it to be the head teacher, trying to inspire these teachers to make sure that they continue to do what's right for these children, but reassuring them that, you're going to be all right? Because I'm sure you probably wasn't 100% sure yourself. You can't guarantee it, can you? So how difficult was that?
Well, we talked a little bit earlier about opportunities and creativity, and the reason why you come into the benefits of leadership, the way you can influence. It can be a very thankless task at the minute because it's logistical and it's management and the rapport on the corridors. We've stripped away in schools because of the way that they're having to function at the minute. We've stripped away of the things that you love the most about the job, the things that get you up in the morning, the human element, the intrinsic sort of desire to be able to do these things every day. Those have been reduced and diminished, and so what we're talking about is the hardest thing. To answer your question, there was a point where I realised I've probably not seen my staff team really together for 6 weeks or 2 months. We kept the school open, but we were really becoming sort of people who were working remotely via emails. Now, the strength of the team in our school was to have everybody in the same room and to say, this is what we're going to do and this is why we're going to do it. And to not have that and to work with everybody individually, via email, removes that. It reduces the trust, and it reduces the togetherness and all of the things, the teamwork, all of those elements that really kind of help you to be successful in a school. And that's the hardest thing. That's the thing that I found. I could see it going. Now, at the same time, the media and the unions, because let's not forget, the NAHT, so the Head Teachers Union, is pretty quiet. There was a narrative there that the teachers were getting about don't go back to school until it's safe. And so, the teachers were inevitably becoming worried and anxious. And it does become sort of tense. You can find yourself with people that you really work with and get along really well. Because of worry, you can find that you're losing the connection and the shared, the principles that brought you to the job together in the first place, that you worked really hard to build and to sustain. And that's the hardest thing. That's a really difficult thing. I'm glad that schools have stayed open and people have managed to actually get back in and to make sure that things can tick.
But as a leader, though, I mean, obviously you've got to get them in, and I completely respect where you're coming from, but almost at the same time, you can't guarantee that they're going to be all right, because they're going on the front line risking their lives, aren't they, almost, because obviously you can get COVID at any time. So what you're asking them to do is risk their lives, like you would in the army. If you're going to war, the sergeants are asking the men to risk their lives. It's the same with teachers at the moment in some respects. I'm not saying as bad as that, but as in some respects, that's what you're asking them to do. So almost if something happens to them in a roundabout way, it's almost on you, isn't it? So I mean, how difficult is that to cope with?
It's unlike anything else. I mean, one of the union letters that I got sort of May time that everybody got, or that basically told implied that you were, unless you were responsible, unless you got all your risk assessments just right, unless you could guarantee the staff's safety, you could be responsible for fatalities. Now, in whose job description does it say that? These things that head teachers are managing, they don't appear in job descriptions. We're not medically trained. We're not able. We're using the same insight that everybody else has. When we contact the local authority or whoever supports us, they don't have the answers to the questions because the politicians don't. The politicians will declare on television that they don't know, and they don't know, and they don't know. And so and that's the highest level of leadership in the country. So you're in this chain with the politicians and the local authority, and then you, I had to say to the staff, this is not my business. I work for the council like you do. If I was making a profit now and I was cutting corners, I would understand why you might feel resentful. But in actual fact, I work in the same situation as you, and I think that you kind of have to try and process things and then present them to staff in the fairest way. And yes, you've got to get your risk assessments right. You've got to do everything you can, and you've got to be as transparent as you can. But there was never any agenda, but there was just worry. And when people worry, inevitably, it changes the dynamics dramatically. And the best way that I could articulate it to the staff, and it probably took me a month or 5 weeks to be able to do this, was, it was that thing about standing in front of them and being able to say, if there's this much risk, we've done this to reduce the risk, we've done this to reduce the risk, and this and this and this and this. I can't guarantee there's no risk, but we've taken it from here to here, and we've made it as low as possible. And present some kind of logic, and that's the best thing that I could do, really.
Naturally, though, as some human beings, some teachers would have naturally thought you're more worried about the school and your position than obviously our safety, And I think naturally, did you find that was the occurrence? Did some of your teachers feel that way?
Well, I think people will talk. People will have the conversations. They have a right to be able to do that. But the one thing you would always say, and it is the same thing, really in any given day in the job, is that the door's open. If you're feeling worried or anxious, not literally, they're going to, we didn't have the same amount of human contact. But ring me, call me, email me. Any questions, I will help you. I will share with you. So what you're trying to do is remove the talking in corners and the whispers and the possibility of people,
Yeah.
developing, sort of worries based on inaccuracy, I suppose, and give them a direct sort of line to be able to say, look, I feel a bit unsure about this. What do you think? Now, if that door has always been open and you've always been somebody who operates in that way, then that is always going to be your response. That please don't digress. Please don't. If you are worried, and I always said to my staff, never go home with a worry. Never go home at the end of the day, because it's only ever the outcome will be negative. It will either manifest, or you'll come back the next morning and the worry will still be there. And we can't be a school that operates on wishful thinking. So we've got to have a conversation where we've got to say, right, how can we address the worry? What can we do? If I can do something, I will do it. And when Boris Johnson sort of gave the first sort of declaration of the lockdown and talked about the fact that it was going to happen, the next day I closed the school. Because we were effectively open all the way through for the key workers. I closed the school really just to be able to speak to the local authority, to check everything, and to make sure that we had everything that we needed to have in place before we reopened it. And I did YouTube videos to parents who were fantastic, because the other thing is, at the same time, whilst you're working with your teachers, and going back to the question of your circumstance, the biggest sort of group is, if you've got 450 families, you've got to make sure that you're transparent with them, and there's no agenda, and that it's not a cheap closure. And while they're watching the media and people are saying schools are shutting or they're not doing the things that you're not doing, you've got to give them some answers and make sure that conversation. So I was sat in my treehouse doing broadcasts on YouTube every week, so that the staff so the teachers could the parents could just see me and just hear the reasons for what we were trying to do. And it was the same with the staff, just being as transparent as possible. And that's the way to sustain trust, isn't it? And it is always about trust, working with people's children and working with staff and being transparent as a leader. The trust, you can never underestimate that trust, and it's tested. It has been tested.
And the thing is, it's very difficult to reassure like parents, teachers, children that you're and it's very difficult to be completely transparent, because you're not getting transparency from above, are you? I mean, so what's the biggest difficulty in sort of being a head teacher with everything that's happened this year? Like the people above you, like what more could they have done to support you as a head teacher?
Well, I think they could, be a little bit more sincere. If we're talking about the people above, as in, the politicians, receptive, certainly to feedback and the conversations, trusting. I think, if you're talking about a regime at the minute where you're considering inspecting schools under these circumstances, can we not trust the teachers and the schools? We've had Ofsted going into schools to be able to talk to one day sort of, not inspections, but basically a process of being able to sort of assess the COVID management in schools. But along with that, that can trigger an inspection. It can trigger, all kinds of things. It adds incredible stress. I would argue that you could probably get the same answers if you'd have emailed the head teachers and said, tell me about what you're doing. But they decided that they wanted to go into the schools themselves, the inspectors. I didn't think that's not required. I think acknowledging, really. I mean, it's that thing. If you speak to your staff, you could say, well, what is the thing that you would be the best thing? I see it all the time. Do I buy you a gift? For your troubles and your efforts, a bottle of wine and a box of chocolates. Is it about the pay rise? It's none of those things. it's all about recognition. It's about the pat on the back, and it's about saying, really appreciate what you're doing. You're doing a great job, and with some sincerity, not as part of an apology, but with sincerity, proactively saying, looking somebody in the eye and being able to do that. I would say that is what the government could have done and should have been doing, and that's the narrative that should have been sustained throughout. And along with the media, I think that is what teachers want: acknowledgement and recognition. It's about job satisfaction, and that's what it gives them. And that's we're talking about teachers, but you've got support staff who could be on sort of between £10,000 and £15,000 a year with a family to fit, and they're putting themselves in those situations. So when we talk about staff in school, we're talking about caretakers, cleaners, minimum wage, people, the whole operation. And I think acknowledgement is the number one thing that you could offer, and that should have been explicit from the politicians.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, ultimately, everyone's suffering, aren't they? I mean, it's not just schools. But what, in particular, why we're doing this podcast is because, yes, other businesses are failing, but teachers are still business as usual, but with more with more risk, aren't they? And like the way that the media is portraying the teaching profession, like school staff, it's not giving it justice, is it? For everything you're doing, I can see the frustration, and because hence why I'm doing this podcast. But it's frustrating even for me to when I'm seeing that the unions are disagreeing, politicians aren't giving the appreciation that it deserves. I mean, what's the answer though? Like, because Phil Sharrock thinks that there should be one union that kind of can stand up to the politicians, because they don't necessarily know what's going on in schools. They never taught themselves. So what is the answer? Like, what do you think that do you think the education community needs to come together and stand up to politicians, or what's the answer here?
I don't think sort of confrontations or a revolt. I don't think it's. I think ultimately the thing that we've got to do is not to distract. We've got to, like we mentioned, we've got to give the teachers in the schools clarity, but ultimately they're governed by a love and a passion for teaching children, and they will do that regardless. And that's what they want to do. So. I think teachers are doing the best and succeeding in not getting distracted by criticisms or union talk or the government or media narratives. It would be easy to do that, but in actual fact, I think what they're doing is what they do best, which is getting up in the morning, dusting themselves down, and getting into the classroom.
Resilient.
And then when they come home at the end of the day, yeah, absolutely. When they come home at the end of the day, the sense of reward and the achievement. Let's not forget, teaching is let's not talk about it as though it's just a job, because it's when you're standing in front of 30 children all day, you can look them in the eye at the start of the day, and you can say to them, before you go home tonight, you're going to know more than you know now. You're going to be smarter at 3 o'clock than you are at 9 o'clock. And that's going to affect your happiness, your feeling of success, your self-esteem, the possibilities in your life, the life choices and the doors that can open. When teachers get into school in the morning, that's what they're focused on. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, they go home knowing, to whatever extent, to whatever degree, that that's what they've done. And that, as long as schools are open, that's what people will do. And whilst those conversations, tick along, there will be an awful lot of teachers who are really, really choosing not to spend too much time getting distracted, so that they can stay focused on the job in hand, which is really sort of one of the real attributes. That's not to say that they're disregarding the union narratives or they're disregarding anything else, but they have to, and they will always want to stay focused on the children. And that's real testament, isn't it?
Absolutely. I completely respect where you're coming from, David. I genuinely do. But I think it goes back to that saying, like, if you keep poking the bear, eventually the bear will growl, right? And it doesn't matter how passionate you are about something. if there's that constant like negative reinforcement where you're feeling like you're undervalued and underappreciated for what you do, and you put your heart and passion into it, people do lose that drive naturally, you know. And it doesn't, like, some people are extra resilient, I completely understand, and yes, teachers are more resilient than majority of other occupations, but there is still that element, and we can see that statistically over the last few years, how many teachers have left the industry, you know, and that was pre-COVID, you know, and like more than ever, we need teachers in the industry. And what's happening right now is it going to attract the right kind of people into the profession, you know?
Well, I mean, the recruitment drive and there are ways, there are solutions to be able to kind of, you know, to bring teachers into the, don't get me wrong, everything that you've said is absolutely right. But there will always be people, you know, why, if we look at, we can defy logic with that, with this answer, I think, you know, a little bit, because logic would say all of the things that you've said. Logic would say you poke the bear, you know, you increase the pressure, you reduce the finances, you know, you increase the challenges. There will always be people who are drawn to that. And I remember somebody sort of saying to me years ago, and it stood me in good stead, whenever there's a disaster and you're focused on the casualties, if you look around close enough, there will always be more helpers, but you don't notice those people. So when you look at an example like Hillsborough or something, you know, and we see that footage, or a natural disaster, whilst we're very fixated and we're looking at the casualty, the victim, what we fail to notice and appreciate sometimes, what we fail to notice and appreciate is surrounding those people, people who are dedicated and giving up and risking their own lives to save others. Now, I'm not saying that we're talking about life-saving circumstances, but in schools there will always be people who are drawn to that degree of challenge and that, you know, feeling, you know, to having the opportunity to be in adversity more often as well, to be able to make a difference. And I think that that's where teachers begin their career. And so, you know, why, you know, if you're going to work in a school, you could work in a school which is a comfortable school, you know, with no problems, or you could work in a school in a corner of town that has a lot of challenges and it's incredibly stressful. Why would you work in one and not the other? And what we see is that in schools like the ones that I've worked in, there are always people who want to come and work and help those thankfully, you know, in those communities and to make a difference. And the bear has been poked for years, TJ. The bear has been well and truly poked, whether or not it's to do with cuts or educational reform or changes. So many things that are just thrown, and just the profession thrives because it's a profession that solves problems. You know, it's a solution-focused profession where there is constant innovation by people, and people are always talking and looking to see how children can learn better and how the outcomes can be better for children. So whether or not people change the exam system or the government decide, you know, we have a change of, you know, of leadership in the government, whatever is thrown at the profession, the children will always thankfully get a good deal because of those people. And if you look closely, that's always the case. So yes, a shortage in people as far as your applications, and there might be other circumstances for that. But you know, and you would always want more teachers. But I think that I have faith that the profession will stay strong. But I'm an optimist by nature, so maybe I'm not a realist.
Well, I really hope so. I really hope so, because we do need teachers, and the future of our economy depends on it, don't it? You talk about the future prime ministers, the future doctors, but when you look at like kind of other European countries, that you look at the average pupils per teacher in a class, you look at like 12, 14, maybe 15, 16 in certain European countries, and the average in the UK, something like 27 per classroom.
Yeah.
You can obviously see there's a massive difference in almost like pretty much double what other European countries, how many pupils they have in a classroom. And I appreciate that UK is quite small and there's a massive population, right? But at the same time, the quality of education, like to give these kids the individual time that you need to sometimes, and it might be a little bit more difficult when you're doing it in a larger group, and like we still talk about there not being enough teachers and the class size getting even bigger. I mean, what point will it stop? You're going to eventually start doing lectures in certain schools, like you would at university. I mean, the shortage crisis is a bit of a problem, isn't it? Let's be honest. But you're right. You will adapt. I mean, the education system adapts every single year. And look at COVID. If you can adapt to COVID, Jesus Christ, you can adapt to anything. But
there's no two, and it is exactly that. And pupil numbers will increase and decrease, and birth rates and things like that. And I think there is always the frustration that you would want to be able to contribute more to how decisions are made at the top level. You'd like to be consulted more, because you would be able to, there's no two ways about the fact if you want a child to learn better, then reduce pupil numbers in the classroom. No two ways about that. And we know that a lot of our schools are old Victorian buildings, which are far from fit to teach, optimum lessons and to have the best learning. But again, on every level, teachers adapt. And as long as they're given the recognition and the right resources, and they're given a fair deal, and it's transparent, they will continue to thrive, and children will continue to get a good deal, and children will leave school with what they need.
Yeah, sorry. We're not getting those things, though. We're not getting the recognition. We're not getting transparency. We're not getting the resources. And it's obviously this is the problem, isn't it? I mean, there's a lot of frustration, I think, in the general community of teachers at the moment, because we're not getting those things.
I think more would be useful. I think that what happens is, within schools, the leaders are consciously offering that to their staff. A good leader would do that. I mean, a good leader would do that sincerely, and regardless, would have those relationships where all of those things are healthy and in place, and nurture those relationships so that recognition is there. In this circumstance, I think people have become more overtly kind of, tuned in to those opportunities, and school leaders compensate for the fact that they can agree that at the top level there needs to be more, but it's futile. How can you start a school day complaining about politicians? You can't enter a classroom in a bad mood. You can't do it, because your body language and the cues and everything else that the children take from you are significant. Some of those children are coming from incredibly challenging circumstances, really, really difficult, chaotic circumstances. They walk into a class and they see that you've got a grouchy face and a short temper. You know what it's like. You spot it straight away. And so you have to do this thing where, right, okay, let's park the politics, let's park those frustrations, because that's not going to serve me in giving those children what they need today. Now, if you consider the fact that every teacher goes into the classroom and in some shape and form does that, then, and thankfully does that, then we're going to be okay, and that's why, like I say, there's a time and a place for the politics and the frustration, but it's really not conducive to giving, to giving a good provision, compassionate caring and quality learning on any given day in any classroom.
Absolutely. And this is, again, like a little bit of what frustrates me. And then I know we're kind of having a little bit of a moment, but what frustrates me is we have people like you in the profession that actually only care about their school and their children and their teachers. And, it's for you, that's what it's about. But from somebody that's from a neutral point of view, but I just don't understand how somebody that's not a specialist at what they do are telling specialists to do their job, and that's what I find frustrating. And I almost feel like the answer to that is to get an educator to be the educational secretary. In my head, it's a no-brainer. But I mean, why hasn't that happened yet? Why isn't there anyone that's from education in the education politics?
Well, I think that goes down to how the party politics and how things are organised systematically, historically. It's I mean, it's comical, really, and
it is comical.
you can have somebody who is making those decisions, albeit with ministers. And I've heard that these decisions can sometimes be made, you know, in the lift on the way up to the boardroom. You know, I've heard from good sources that that can occur, that policy can be written in that way. So whilst we can, again, sort of grumble and complain about that, I mean, the one thing that we do know is that, you know, whoever is the Minister of Education is going to do it for a short period. They probably won't get a chance to see through the manifesto and the things that they want to put into place. So whatever they present to you is going to take at least 8 years to be able to kind of come to fruition. The likelihood is that they're not going to get that, and by, you know, 4 years later, or however, if they last that long, they're going to be in charge of transport or you know, something else. So, you know, again,
it's like a stepping stone, isn't it? It's almost like a stepping stone to become an education secretary for something bigger for some of these guys, isn't it? I mean, the usual the time span usually for an education secretary is about 18 months. So they can't ever implement the things that they promised, you know?
You know, so I look at the you know, the big changes that came in through Michael Gove and you know, really contentious things that were very heartfelt and very frustrating to be able to sort of see sort of being implemented. And at the end of it, you kind of, like I say, you had to laugh about it, because, you know, at the same time, you're sort of thinking, well, he's going to be Minister of Sausages next week. You know, he's literally going to be shifted from one place to another. I mean, I think he's on his, so Michael Gove is in his fourth position, moving sideways regardless. And, you know, and you know, out of all of those different sort of appointments, or you know, they're not even really promotions. You know, all of those circumstances, you know, he's not in a position, he's dependent on others to give him the information that he needs. And he's the fella who stands at the front and says, you know, certain things. So, yes, frustrating. And yes, you would love to see somebody sort of from an educational background making those decisions. But again, you know, whatever has been thrown, and some radical things have been put in, you know, schools and school leaders are the people, the movers and the shakers. You know, it's not the politicians. You know, nobody comes to school for that. The people who are influential in making things right are the teachers, and they you know, the ideas and the suggestions that they come up with. It might take a bit of time, and don't get me wrong, with a lot of scrutiny and pressure. You know, but the you know, the things that people come up with are incredible. And, you know, they continue to make a difference. And let's not forget that, you know, over the last, however, you know, 40 years or so, the deal that the children get in the classroom is much better. Some of it may be to do with policy, but 99% of it is to do with the person standing at the front.
Absolutely. And I think that's kind of going back to what I said. I mean, and that's the hardest bit at the moment, is to find those people that want to do it for the right reasons. You know, I think some graduates are thinking about, oh, shall I go into teaching right now because it's a secure job? And that's absolutely, you're going to absolutely set yourself up to fail in a couple of years' time, aren't you? Because it's not an easy job. You have to have that passion to want to make a difference to these kids if you want to be successful, don't you? Otherwise you end up getting burnt out and leaving after 4 years, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And you know, you have to be, I mean, you have to shoulder that as a head teacher as well. When you bring somebody in as a teacher, the likelihood is that you know that they're not going to be quite at a point, and more, you know, more often than not, if they are newly qualified, inevitably they're not going to be, you know, in a position where they are yet. You know, it takes, Ros Wilson's written a book, it takes 5 years to become a good teacher, or to become a teacher. It's true. You need to be allowed and supported over those 5 years and more, because you never stop learning. And as a leader, when you appoint somebody as a head teacher, whenever appointing a new teacher is an opportunity. Again, it goes back to, it's an opportunity. Every time you make an appointment, it's an opportunity to make your school better. But you quite often look at the person in front, and when you're doing the lesson observations for the interviews, and think, they're not there yet, but can I, as a leader, help them to be the teacher they need to be? And if you have faith in how you can do that, and they have the potential, i.e. they do have the rapport, they do have the charisma, they do have the ability to learn the profession and the trade, then you can do it, you know, and that's, again, being able to make sure that can happen, and the teachers that come into the profession don't leave, as you say, TJ, don't disappear. They actually say, right, okay, this person's supporting me and looking after me, and if it takes 2, 3, 5 years for me to teach, knockout lessons every day, then so be it. That's how it's going to work. We want to get there as quick as we can, don't get me wrong, but in actual fact, we have to appreciate that there is a skill set that needs to be really carefully nurtured and developed, and that requires support.
Yeah, for sure. Can we just go back to when we talked about trust, right? And we're just going back to that because of everything you've just said. As a senior leader, I think, like through my experience, obviously I've been doing education recruitment for like 6 years, and I see a lot of NQTs that didn't complete their NQT yet because they felt they didn't have the right support. Now we talk about trust, and we talked about trust a little bit earlier, and if you expect the government to kind of trust teachers, and we as teachers, you'd like to trust the government, right? But you almost want the government just to let teachers get on with it. But when you hear stories like that, you almost need to monitor it, don't you? You need to monitor to make sure schools are given the right level of support, because there's certain NQTs that will come in, and you almost, or graduates rather, that will come into teaching, and you kind of set them up to fail because they haven't been given the right support. And unfortunately, not every head teacher's been like you, David. Like some head teachers aren't as involved, or aren't as charismatic, or aren't as supportive to them as an individual. I mean, like, how can we have a system that where we can trust each other when situations like that happen every day?
Well, I think we have to look at where the success stories lie. You have to look, and you have to. I don't believe that any head teacher or anybody else goes into the job for any other reason than to get the best outcomes. It's in everybody's interests to be able to do that in the classroom. And so, in order to be able to kind of, how do we do that? If we work and look with the leaders that have been successful in doing that, if we take from those people, if we, if every head teacher is willing to sort of, be receptive to changing and developing their own practice and how they work with new teachers or teachers, who need to improve, and to get those processes in place, then in itself it becomes a profession that can self-regulate and can improve, because schools will work with schools and in partnership, and making sure that schools aren't sort of out of that, making sure that they're included in the process. And schools are very wired to constantly improve. School improvement is something that is always going to be, significant. It's always going to have to happen. And so the best way to do that, it goes back to that thing is, the only way you can make the school right and healthy is to work in those ways with those teachers. And the minute they walk through the door, it has to kick in, and it has to be good, the support, no matter who the person is. Because if they've been appointed, they're going to need help. Well, it doesn't matter. Even experienced teachers need support. This is not something that's unique and exclusive to newly qualified teachers, but it has to be part of the package. Because the pressure would dictate that it's incredibly important.
Of course, but like we're going into this year, I think obviously you want to give your level of support to anyone that's doing a PC last year, right? I mean, they're obviously struggling anyway because the whole practice has changed from the time that they've learned, right? And so they've gone into this year having to forget everything that they've learned last year, adapting to the new way of teaching. And then you've got senior leadership that on 3 hours duty a day because they're having to change with the bubbles, and that level of support isn't going to be there this year. I mean, like, what advice would you have for them this year to help them get through this year and kind of make sure that they don't leave the profession before it's even started?
Well, I think, first of all, they need to know that it's exceptional. So they need to know that the job that they came into and that they anticipate that they wanted to do is still there, albeit we're working under exceptional pressure and the circumstances are different. It's one of those situations, it might not be helpful to anybody, but if you can do it in these circumstances, just wait until we get a little bit more freedom and those things, fall into place, and we'll get our reassurances, post-COVID, hopefully. That's first and foremost. I think that needs to be explicit with all of your teachers. So before they beat themselves up, because I think, that the prospect of them going home feeling useless, overwhelmed, etc., we have to negate that by saying it's exceptional. Please, just take be kind to yourself. The second thing is, And it goes back to any bad day in teaching, or the days that don't go well, is that you can't come to school the next day just with wishful thinking. You can't walk into the classroom and just hope that everything's going to be all right. You've got to talk to people. You've got to be able to go, before you go home, you've got to be able to have the right relationships to be able to say, today's not been good. And somebody to be able to say, well, let's have a little think about what we can do tomorrow. What are the things that we can change? How can we adapt? And that has to be offered as thick and fast as it can be, by not just by the head teacher. Yes, they play a part. And it does occur inevitably with each other. And that collaboration, who's to say that the legacy might not be that we might end up with stronger teachers and stronger teams? Because that adversity that we get, because we work in circumstances where, we're talking about, serious child protection and, difficulties, like I say, all the things that I've mentioned. Who's to say that from that we can't have some exceptional, and we will have some exceptional teachers? But inevitably, the human beings in the world need all of those things every day, all of those reassurances and all of those acknowledgements. And also not to be casting too much of an eye on the quality control. Normally we would be saying, are they a good teacher, what they need to do next, etc. We need to change those approaches. That's kind of what I'm doing now with the platform that I've designed, just, to try and sort of work with staff in a different way, where the scrutiny is different, it's managed differently, and we're shouldering that so teachers can relax to the best of their ability under the circumstances and have the best chance of having a successful and good day. And that's what they need, because the minute those NQTs and those new teachers, the minute they have a great day, everything shoots back up again. That's the way that the job works, and they go home and they tell everybody about it. And let's not forget, the profession itself, it's not the trajectory doesn't go like that. We don't, it's like that. And it's that quote again about, the road to success is always under construction. And if you can appreciate that from the first day, then you're kind of going to be all right in the long run.
Yeah, I think as human beings, we tend to have this this almost self-destruct button, don't we? We kind of become our own worst enemies, and like we have a bad day and we think it's over. Like the amount of times I've thought about leaving recruitment because you've had a bad day, and it's about reassuring yourself and remember why you've got into the profession in the first place and what you want to achieve out of it and what is it about. Because it's not like you've said, and I think it's very important. It's not about the politics. It's not about the media. It's not about what people's perception is. It's about what you want to achieve and what you want to get out of the profession. And for teaching, it's about making the difference to these kids, and helping these kids like become something of themselves. And that is, and those hard days, you've got to kind of think about that and hone in your thoughts onto that, haven't you? And it's very hard when you've got tunnel vision, when everything's going like it's sort of your back's against the wall, but you just got to remember what you got into the job for, and that's
exactly. It's exactly that. You can't deviate from that. And that's why that's why teachers will struggle when they're tired, and overworked, and that's going to be a part of it. But managing that, you can manage that for your teachers and help them with it to some extent. But everybody, there's a certain degree in teaching of self-help. You have to look after yourself to be able to see clearly, to give yourself the best chance. And I used to get up in the morning, and at 6:20, I used to run around the park 3 times every morning. Have my shower, have my coffee, and give myself the best chance of saying the right things the moment I walk through the door, because that would set me up with the best chance of having the best day I could. I didn't do that because I like running. I hate running. My knees are in terrible. It's not a good thing, running. But, ultimately, it's that thing about, right, what is it that's going to give me what I need to be able to see it through? And I think I would suggest, time for teachers to be able to look at how best they can help themselves with some of those things as well. When with a clear head, with a clear mind.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of obviously like graduates that want to get into teaching, it's obviously difficult times at the moment. But I mean, why should any graduates get into teaching? Because when you leave school, you don't go get a degree and think, I want to become a teacher. Like, what is the motivation behind becoming a teacher, and what's your motivation for teaching kids?
Well, the one thing that I would say is I'm a better human being because I've been a teacher. Teacher has changed the way that I think, the way that I behave. I'm a better dad. I'm a better husband. I'm a better person. Whatever it may be, because of that. Now to break that down and to look, you could talk about that for a long time, but it's that exchange. When you walk into a classroom as a teacher, you have to, everything that you've done and everything that you've learned is who you are. All of your experiences, that's what you bring into that room. Now, if you walk into that room and you're willing to give some of that away to the children and to share that, and the children walk into the room and they give some away, so they tell you about the children, the dog, and the friendships and the football team or whatever they're interested in, and we have an exchange, then we have a relationship, then we nurture that, then we put the children in a position where they are safe, comfortable, happy, and they can learn. When they start to learn, then that is ultimately the end product out of all that chain of events. If you want to be in a job where you can do that every day and leave the building at the end of the day, dusting yourself down and knowing that you've offered that to every single child as best as you can, and seeing the dividends of that, seeing the parents the next day, happy, talking to you, respecting you, regarding you, all that, then ultimately, what better job is there? This is when you see those children as adults, 10, 15 years later, and you look back at the cards that they sent you on the day that they left you, and all those things. For some children, they've got mum, dad, and then you, and you're the most, and in some children's lives, they've got you. So you are the most influential, one of the most significant people in their lives. And it goes right back to what I said at the start. It's about opportunity. The whole job is about opportunity, leadership, whatever degree. It's about opportunity. If you see every single conversation, every lesson, everything you do as an opportunity, then ultimately, it's incredibly fulfilling. And I suppose when people talk about things being rewarding, because people always said to me, "It must be really rewarding, must be really," and it's like, yeah, it is. Yeah, I'm not quite sure. I feel tired, but but in actual fact, that sense of reward is all of those things. It's that chain of things. It's a very personal thing to be able to do. It's incredible. And just to add to that, TJ, some of the times when it is least likely to happen, I'm somebody who I like a challenge. A challenge to me is an invitation. So that's a chance to say, somebody says this can't be done. I'm gonna show you it can be done. So if I give you an example, a child walked through the door. This is somebody who's been excluded. He comes in and on his first day in school, runs around and tears up the school. He's got nothing on but a pair of school trousers. He's running around and you're thinking on your feet, right, how do I deal with this? I've met his mum and I've told him that I'm going to look after him and we're going to be all right. He runs around, sweating cobs around the corridors and around the school. After about 2.5 hours of basically containing him, at 3 o'clock, just before we're going to go home, I ask him to come and sit down for me in a little room. He sits down for me and he puts his shirt on and I tied his shoes and I looked him in the eye and I said, "I'm going to look after you. You're not going to get excluded from the school. We're going to make sure that you're successful. We're going to make sure it happens." And that's in a very challenging circumstance where you don't know if those words are going to mean anything. And he was expected to be excluded again. And 4 years later, he left for high school in good shape. Now, that's when you're tested, and your back's against the wall. But it goes back to that emotional connection. And, when you ask people about, when you tell people about the job that you do, you can judge by people's reaction that is profound, but you kind of know it's pretty special as teaching.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's really good advice, and I really appreciate you sort of obviously saying that. And I think again, this is another reason why I want to do this podcast is so people understand, like what it means to be a teacher, and for any, like I said, we need teachers in the industry. So I hope graduates do watch this that are kind of looking to become teachers, because obviously some of the podcasts I've done is with some of the most inspirational educators in the country, and just to see their passion for what they do and the difference that they make to these kids, it's really infectious, like for me, I mean, if I didn't have my business, I'd probably want to go into teaching, and it's hard, isn't it? But I really hope people do kind of go into teaching, because A, I'll be out of a job if they don't, but B, more the future of this country depends on it. And we're talking about making a difference to these kids' lives, and it's not just about educating them; it's about giving them that safe haven and like mentoring them and helping them become adults, and there's no better feeling than that, and I just hope more people get into it. I mean, is there anything you want to add before we finish off today?
It's been great to be able to sort of share some of these things and to be able to articulate, with you today, and to be able to talk through the importance of the job. I think, you started the conversation by talking about some of the criticisms and some of the perceptions of teaching, but anybody who works in teaching and works with children knows and gets it. And, the profession will always thrive. It will always be healthy. There'll be days when it gets beaten up, like any teacher, where you feel that way. But the ability really to be able to go back to things, the intrinsic sort of, draw towards the classroom to be able to make those differences is not going to change. I would say that if you've got the right people inducting teachers, if you've got the right people, attracting teachers and working with your new teachers, as well as supporting everybody else, which there are great leaders, head teachers out there, then ultimately each of these communities, all of these children, can only succeed. And I've got, faith that that's the way things will be. So when you see the news, when we have the distraction of COVID, let's stay focused on the children, and let's make sure that we can get the right outcomes.
Absolutely. And just to add to that, also the teacher well-being, because I think that is massively important as well. I mean, if teachers aren't looked after in this period, they're not going to look after the children. I mean, they need to be looked after as well, isn't it? And I think for any senior leaders across the country that are watching this, I mean, I think that's a really important element to take away from this podcast too, because yes, it's about the children, but if you don't look after the teachers, how are they meant to look after the children? And that's what it goes down to.
It does. And it does. It's absolutely that. We have to value and look after our teachers. In other countries, and you've mentioned it already, teachers are given, seemingly higher regard from the media and publicity, which is incredibly influential. And I've had families come from overseas who've travelled across the world, as refugees to be able to get to the school that I'm in. And they shake my hand every morning and call me sir. And that's not because that's the kind of person I am. That's because the culture and the background they come from, that's the way teachers are regarded. And I would say, parting words today, TJ, is to, let's try and see some of that. Let's try and sort of, view our teaching profession as, let's get the significance. Let's get the big picture and start to understand why those people are important, and let's shake their hands, and let's speak to them in the right way, and let's acknowledge what they do, and let's make sure that we do look after them and have regard.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree anymore. And just to kind of finish it off there, for any teachers that are listening to this, massive thank you for everything you're doing for this country. Even around the world, if you're listening, I mean, thank you for everything you're doing, because times are hard, and I'm sure there's so many teachers that thought about quitting, but you guys are heroes. You are absolute heroes at the moment, and you're saving kids' lives every day, and you're shaping these kids for their future. So yeah, we can't thank you enough for everything you're doing.
I agree.
Yeah, I will leave it there, David. Thanks for coming on, and I really appreciate your time.
You're more than welcome. Thanks for the chance to chat about this stuff. Thanks, TJ.
Cheers, David.